What I'm going to answer in this video is, why is EXIF data not important to you? It's like that saying, I can feed a man fish and he'll eat for a day. I can teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime, or something like that. Same thing. So how's it going? Today, as you've seen in the title, we're going to talk about EXIF data and why you shouldn't be asking what people's EXIF data is. So you look at a picture and you love it, and you're like, well, I don't know, I don't understand the setting. I don't know what settings he used. What was his aperture? What was his shutter speed? Why does it matter? If the photographer had EXIF data, 500ths of a second, f2.8, 200 ISO, and you set your camera to those settings and went out and take a picture, your exposure is not going to be correct, unless you got extremely lucky. That may not be the reason why you're asking. The other reason why you're asking is, how do I get that look? You should never have to ask for EXIF data. What you need to do is understand what the settings do to your camera. Everybody's looking for a shortcut. There's no shortcuts. You can't just look at a photo and its EXIF data and think you've learned something. You didn't learn anything. You learned what that photographer did to create that look, but you don't know why. And if you understand each setting of the camera, if you understand shutter speed, if you understand aperture, and if you understand ISO, you will understand how to create any image you want. You'll be able to look at a photo and pretty much get in the roundabout way of what settings they use on any particular image. If you understand settings, you'll understand what these photos that you're looking at are doing. And you don't have to ask what their EXIF data is. You can just look at it. Is the background blurry? How sharp is everything? What's the depth of field? Is there motion blur? Is it tack sharp? Like unmoving, like nothing is moving. What are you asking the settings for? I've never asked anybody their settings, ever. I don't understand. What are you getting out of it? You're looking at a photo and the background's blown out. Guess what? He probably shot at 1 point something to 2 aperture. Because you have creamy bokeh or tona. If you're looking at video or whatever. It's creamy. The background's creamy. It's out of focus. The subject is coming off of the background. Separation because of that, because it's out of focus. And that's why they do that, to get that background separation from the subject. It's great for portraiture, right? But they're wide open. So you just know that. If you see a blurry background and a sharp in focus subject, you already know that he shot at probably 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, f2, you know, something along those lines is where he achieved that. Can you get bokeh with the f4? Absolutely, if you have a telephoto lens and you're compressing it down and you're up close to the subject. The closer you are to the subject with a longer lens, the more bokeh, the more creamy you're going to get that background. But the thing is, the point is, you have to learn this stuff. You have to understand this stuff. So you just know. And you don't have to ask a million people what their data is. I have never asked a photographer what his data was. What was your settings on this photograph? Even if they provide it, I don't even look at it. I don't give a crap what his settings were. I'm enjoying the image. And could I create it? Absolutely. Why? Because I understand all the settings. I understand what they do. I understand if I want to freeze the motion, I need to be around 1/500th of a second or faster. And you can do it at 2/50th, as long as the motion is not too fast. Even 125, as long as the motion is not too fast. But you can't learn in automatic. You need to turn it on manual, and you need to practice, and you need to see what all these shutter speeds do and all these apertures do and what the differences are. Stop worrying about going out and taking the best picture. Just go to the park by yourself and get you an object and stand at different distance from that object, at different apertures from that object, and go stand by the road and shoot people driving by and bicyclists going by and at different shutter speeds and see what kind of results you get. And you do that over and over again, and you understand, okay, if I'm at this shutter speed, this is how much blur I get. If I pan at this shutter speed, this is how much motion blur I'm going to get. If I just hold the camera steady and let it go by me, this is what it's going to look like at this shutter speed, at this shutter speed, at this shutter speed. If I shoot at f1.4, 3 feet from my subject, this is what the background looks like. If I'm 15 feet from my subject, this is what the background looks like at all these different f-stops. You should understand what's going to happen, but if you don't apply it in practice and see the results yourself with your camera, with your lenses, you're never going to get it. Asking EXIF data from this guy isn't going to help you. There is nothing to learn from that. Okay? I shot this picture at f8, 500ths of a second, ISO 200. So what? What is that telling me? Well, everything's in focus. Everything seems to be unmoving. This car went by, there's a little bit of blur. That's what you're going to get at 500ths of a second. That's what you're going to get at f8. Knowing these things eliminates those questions. Learn. And you don't have to ask people what their data was. You have to understand. And you need to, there's probably 1,000, 2,000 videos on YouTube explaining the exposure triangle, explaining what each setting does. I don't feel like I should do a tutorial on that because it's been done over and over and over and over, and maybe the way I teach could help you. I don't know. If you want me to do a course on the exposure triangle, explaining shutter speed, aperture, ISO, let me know in the comments below, and I'll be happy to put a video up to do it. There's plenty of them out there. Just look for it. But if you want me to do it, I'll do it. I don't care. I might have a way to explain it that sinks in. Some people learn different ways. Some people do. Some people learn differently. So if that's something you want, let me know. Watch tutorials on YouTube. Read a book. Go out in the field and practice. Nobody wants to do the hard work. They want everything handed to them. And it doesn't teach you anything. It's like that saying, I can feed a man fish and he'll eat for a day. I can teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime, or something like that. Same thing. I can hand you data. I can say, oh, take this picture, set your camera at 1/1000th of a second, f2.8, your ISO is 400, we'll say. And that's perfect exposure, we'll just say. And you take the photo and it's fantastic. But you can't do it again on your own because you don't understand why I told you that. You don't understand that I told you 1/1000th of a second because I want to freeze the motion. You don't understand that I told you f8 because I want a wide depth of field. I want this in focus, this in focus, and this in focus all the way through. You don't understand that I said ISO 300 because that's how sensitive we need that sensor in order to make those other two other two settings that we set and everything properly exposed. It takes all three, the exposure triangle, to make it properly exposed. The shutter speed and the aperture give you your result. That's your look. Blur, no blur. Focus, everything in focus, not everything in focus. You know what I'm saying? Your ISO takes those adjustments and makes everything look good. Makes everything properly exposed. Not overexposed, not underexposed. I mean, I don't even know what my data is. You know what I'm saying? I know what I'm trying to achieve, so I set my settings in order to achieve that. Once the picture is taken, I don't care what my settings were. And it's irrelevant. I got the look I was going for. Because I know how to control my camera. And it really boils down, I mean, yes, understanding it, getting some lessons, reading about it, listening, watching a tutorial, whatever. But if you're not applying what you learned in practice, you can't just listen to somebody and then go hit the streets. If you're not taking the knowledge that you learn and applying it into a practice, then nothing's going to be innate. Nothing's going to be like instantaneous. For example, there was a shot of a bicyclist that I did a pan. I panned with him, so he was somewhat sharp, and everything else was kind of out of focus and streaking with motion. It shows motion, and I did that purposely. I just didn't want to take a guy riding by on a bicycle and freeze everything because it's boring. There's certain situations that would be cool. I have another photograph a couple weeks ago of a woman riding a bike and everything's frozen. But what was cool about that photo is the negative space. She's small, bright. The sunlight is on her. And she's up against a shadow. And there's a lot of negative space there, which makes it interesting. That was the interest. The composition in a whole was what made it interesting. This photograph with the guy riding by at a slower shutter speed would not have been interesting if I just froze the image. It was just a guy riding across. It's nothing dramatic or interesting. The lighting wasn't good. So I created interest with movement. I panned the camera. I watched him. I panned across. I took the picture when he got there. And that was the end of it, right? But I wasn't set up for that. I knew I wanted to take a photo like that day, and I didn't see any bicyclists. I mean, they're around. But I saw him coming. He was a little bit down there, but I didn't have a lot of time. So real quick, I threw my shutter speed down to 1/60th of a second. I was probably set at 1/500. That's typically where I set my camera when I'm on the streets. I saw him coming. I threw it down to 1/60th, which meant if you're throwing your shutter speed slower, I'm going to be letting a lot more light in, so I'm going to be overexposed. So I had to make two adjustments. I had to throw it down slower, and I just threw my aperture. I just spun my aperture all the way to A. So it just made the decision for me. And so I hit 60, I spun it to A, and I panned and took the shot. If it's an exposure thing, then you can get the exact same exposure at 100 different setting combinations. The only thing it changes is your depth of field, your motion blur or freeziness. Is that a word? Freeziness? That's a word now. And, that's what you're changing. You're not changing the exposure because you're properly exposed. No matter what setting combinations as long as your setting combinations are exposing the picture properly, you can do that a million ways. This is like slow. It's like slow shutter photography. Like if I'm taking a picture of a stream and I want to, it to be silky smooth, I need to do a long exposure. I need to do a 2 or 3 second, maybe 5 to 8 second exposure on those things, right? So it's going to be properly exposed. I can take the exact same photo, properly exposed at a faster shutter speed and just freeze it. It's still going to be properly exposed, but my results are different. I'm going to have frozen boring water, or I can have silky smooth water, depending on how fast my shutter speed is. So you need to practice that stuff. You need to practice depth of field with each lens, because every lens is going to be different. Depth of field on a 23 millimeter lens is going to be different than depth of field on a 100 millimeter lens. Because when you have a longer focal length, you're compressing down the image, and it just reacts differently. You're squeezing things together, and if you're close to a subject and you're focused on them and you're squeezing in everything behind them, it's going to appear larger, and depending on what aperture you're at, it's going to appear less focused. It's hard to get a creamy bokeh background with a wide angle lens. Usually, no matter what f-stop you're at, pretty much the whole entire scene's in focus. Now, the more you shut down, the more sharp that focus is going to be, but even at wide open, it's going to be in focus. You're going to be able to tell all the details back there. It may not be crisp, but you'll be able to tell what it is. To where if I'm doing it with a telephoto lens, it's going to be so creamy, you can't even tell with the tree. It's just color. It's just green and brown, and it's like a smear of paint. It's a really cool effect. But I am a documentary photographer, so I am looking to tell a story. And in order for me to tell a story, I have to show the environment. I personally want everything in focus. I want the subject in focus. I want his environment in focus. And the environment doesn't have to be tack sharp, but it has to be readable. I want you to know that they are on the street. I want you to see the car. I want you to see the layers. There's no layers if everything's creamy. You know what I mean? When we got this couple over here doing something interesting, and your subject's doing something interesting, and you got a really cool background, if you don't have all those things in focus, you lose all those elements, all those layers. So then you're back down to one layer. And I think one layer photography is portrait photography. Because the only thing important is the person in the portrait. So I may be rambling. I'm not sure. I'll know if I'm rambling by the drop-off rate we get with this video. So here's a couple playlists. If you like street photography, here's some POV street photography stuff. And if you like documentary stuff, I have a few of those. I have some abandoned houses in this video here. And one of them's kind of spooky. It's a abandoned building full of birds. It's kind of spooky. That's it. You guys have an amazing day, an amazing week, and I will see you next week. Maybe this week. I don't know if I'm gonna. I don't know. We'll see. Later.